Hi, Steve Barsh from Dreamit Ventures. Welcome to Dreamit Live today, where we have Dan Costantino. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about CISOs and their talkback, or what they want to say to cyber startups to stop making certain sales mistakes. That Dan's going to share some of the experiences. We're just going to give about 2 to 3 minutes for the audience to build as notifications are just going out. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. For those that are joining us now, please do us a favor. If in the comments section you just kind of log in and tell us who you are and where you're from, what city you're from. It's always fun to see who is online from the comments. Dan, thanks for joining us. We'll burn a couple minutes. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was excellent.
Good. Go anywhere fun?
No, we stayed local. So my family, my wife's family, were all local. So it was
cool.
A big gathering, good food. We had a good time.
Any plans for the upcoming holidays, if I can ask?
Nothing major, no.
Okay.
No, we just did a trip to Disney a couple of weeks ago.
And how? Oh, I saw that note. So how was that? It's a great experience and great fun until
it was. Yeah, that was my note. Right, it's the happiest place on earth until you get your itemized receipt.
Right.
After the vacation's over.
Mickey is expensive. Expensive.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's a daughter. Your kids had a good time?
I have a 6-year-old daughter, and she had a blast.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
have you ever been? I've
age.
only been once, actually.
This is my first time in 15 years
that
I've been. Yeah.
And what did you think, besides just seeing how happy she was?
You know, it was an experience, to say the least. So, you know, we got there and we got the full experience staying on site and on the park. And
oh, nice.
You know, they trapped us there and made sure that they gave us the full magical experience.
Wow.
And
that's cool.
yeah, she had a great time. We had a great time. It was I think right now seems like a good time of year. The crowds are small, so we enjoyed it.
Right. So for those that are just joining us, yes, we're talking about Disney World in Orlando, Florida. In just a minute, we're going to talk about cybersecurity and mistakes that startups make. Our guest today, Dan Costantino from Penn Medicine, the CISO of Penn Medicine. We're just going to give it probably about another 1.5 to 2 minutes for other people to join, and then we're going to dive into it, get in. Again, if you're just logging in the comments section, if you can just write what city you're from. It's always fun to know where people are logging in from. As we go through this, by the way, if you have questions, please leave them in the comments. We'll be happy to take your questions at the end. We'll do a live Q&A with people. And I'm trying to think what else. So we're in Philadelphia today. It's December. People are watching it recorded. Now you know we did it in December. And it should be fun. And we appreciate you coming in here. It's interesting. 30 seconds. Okay, we have about 30 seconds to go, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. It'll be fun. It's an interesting week for Dreamit too. We have, I don't know, I think 16 or 17 startups. Right now they're all on the West Coast pitching investors. So it's a crazy time of year between Thanksgiving and Christmas, but we have a lot of our startups out doing their investor sprints.
Yeah, that's a grind right between the holidays.
It is a grind between, but they're passionate to get rounds at least started, right? Because we always talk to startups, it takes 3 to 6 months to close a round.
Sure.
And this is just part of a process. Okay, great. So we're 3 minutes in, we're live. Again, if you're just joining us, hi, Steve Barsh from Dreamit Ventures in Philadelphia, joined by Dan Costantino from Penn Medicine CISO. Dan, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. So if you're just logging in, please put, if you don't mind, in the comment section, if you just put what city you're logging in from, that would be great. If you have questions as we go through this, please leave your questions in the comment section. We'll take them at the end. Dan, can we start off? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What have you done? Where do you come from? What's your background? You're now CISO at Penn Medicine.
Sure.
What did you do before?
Yeah, so I got my start in cyber during my time in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. So I was in the Marine Corps between 2007 and 2012. I was with 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. And
thank you for your service.
Thank you. And you know, I started off in IT. I did computer networking, a little bit of systems administration, and this was kind of I don't want to say before the cyber boom, you know, but a little bit before.
Wait, what
the
year
curve.
Was that?
2007, 2008.
Okay. All right.
And they said, hey, you know, we know we're an infantry unit, but we need somebody to do cybersecurity. And you know, I raised my hand and said I'd love to. I think that sounds really interesting. So that's how my career got started. I started it, in the infantry of the Marine Corps, and then you know, I did my undergrad in cybersecurity. And yeah, from there I transitioned out of the Marine Corps and got into consulting. So I did consulting here in the Philadelphia area for a while. Mm-hmm. Did consulting for small business and mid-market business and some large organizations as well. I did that in at two different firms. I did it in one local firm, and then myself and a couple of friends of mine, other Marines, we had a firm out in Malvern, which still
Philly
exists.
suburbs.
Yeah, Philly suburbs, exactly. And during my time there, I actually came in and I met with the CIO of Penn Medicine, and we hit it off. And he asked me to come on full time. That was about 3 years ago as the Chief Information Security Officer. Actually, the inaugural Chief Information Security Officer, which was exciting and terrifying at the same time.
That's interesting.
Yeah, things have come a long, long way over there at Penn Medicine, to say the least.
So you've been at Penn Medicine for 3 years as the CISO. Could you talk a little bit about, from a Penn Medicine perspective, and your role there, how big are things? How many people? How many computers? Endpoints? What's it look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's grown over the years through a lot of merger and acquisition. So today, Penn Medicine is roughly 40 to 45,000 employees.
Wow, I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah, it's very, very large. It's grown over the years. There's been some mergers and acquisitions with Lancaster General Hospital, Chester County Hospital, most recently Princeton Hospital. And then there's the private practices of Penn Medicine as well. So there are 6 main hospitals, and then the School of Medicine as well. So the University of Pennsylvania Health System plus the Perelman School of Medicine make Penn Medicine.
Got it, okay.
So when you think about endpoints, we're protecting over 100,000 endpoints at Penn Medicine.
Endpoint being a computer, a mobile phone, diagnostic imaging?
Correct. It could be a laptop, it could be a desktop, it could be a medical device, IoT. You have today, there's building automation, there's security systems. We're not far away from light bulbs and blinds having IP addresses.
Got it. Okay, so about 45,000 people, 100,000 endpoints. You have an EMR, electronic medical record system. You have everything going on. Wow, it's a lot to protect, and it's distributed over lots of locations. Do you anything on the physical? You're a CISO, right? You don't deal with the physical plant. Not security of the building.
Correct. Strictly information security.
Strictly information.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So one of the things we were talking about before we got started today, that I think would be helpful for people to know is you were mentioning kind of the things that are on your minds these days, what you're pushing lately. When you're on the speaking circuit, kind of pushing the edge. Could you talk a little bit like, what are your big hot buttons? We're going to get into the whole startups and mistakes they make, but I just want to kind of get in the mindset. What's important to you these days from a security point of view?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one is business enablement through security, and a lot of others have
an oxymoron.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of others have started doing this, but haven't quite found their way down the path, and some of that's due to business process restrictions, and others is due to technology restrictions or just adoption of it. But security programs are now trying to figure out how do we enable the business through information security.
What does that mean?
So what I mean by that, think traditional business enablement through security would be a single sign-on system, right? Being able to log into all of your systems at Penn Medicine or at your organization with one single identity.
Right.
That is, in theory, that's a more secure solution than having a ton of usernames and passwords. Sure. But at the same time, it's enabling the people at Penn Medicine. It's enabling business operations.
Right.
Those types of opportunities for cybersecurity teams are few and far between, right? It's very difficult to enable a business when you are adding a second factor of authentication, right? Or
like the text goes to your cell phone or some other secondary second factor, two-factor. Right?
Exactly, right. Or if we're asking you to type an extra keyword into the subject line to encrypt your email or whatever it is, it always tends to add a little bit of time to what you're doing, right? If you think about, especially in healthcare and business operations, they're trying to shave seconds, right? Off of everything. You think about emergency room visits, right? They're spending a ton of time trying to figure out how do we reduce these visits by 8 seconds, right? Meanwhile, we're saying, hey, you now need to enter a second factor of authentication, which is going to add 7 more. So we're trying to figure out how do we start to enable the business? How do we start to introduce technology platforms and integration that offers a high level of security but gives a high level of business enablement as well. So think about remote access and logging in through a VPN, for instance. If you, today in most organizations, if you were to take your laptop, your corporate laptop, and you were to take it off-site or off the network, hopefully you're then required to come through a virtual private network to get back onto the network and start to operate on the business network.
An example of this, like as a physician goes home, but they want to access Epic for their medical records, or a radiologist wants to log in remotely and take a look.
Exactly.
And keeping that secure. Okay.
Exactly right. So in traditional scenarios, you would leave the office, you would log in, you would have to enter your credentials into a VPN, and then you would be asked for a second factor of authentication, and that session would eventually time out. And it's not terribly cumbersome, right? But it's definitely an inconvenience that I think physicians aren't used to in the past.
Right.
And through business enablement, you could do something like an always-on VPN, right? Where if you build a trusted model and you can 100% say that we trust these devices, we know it's ours, we know it's secure, we know that it meets all of our security standards, why not have a VPN that's always on that device, right? As long as it's encrypted and has strong credentials. And,
to get into the device itself.
To get into the device itself, right. Why not have it always accessing the network? You're also taking security with you from the office as well. Think about web content filters and some of the other security controls that are being lost as you leave the office today.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas if you're always on the network and you're always on a VPN, you're now carrying those security controls over into employees' homes as well.
Interesting.
So that's an example of you're introducing more security to the organization and more security to a user's experience, yet you're actually enhancing their experience at the same time. You're enabling the business and you're enabling business operations.
Interesting. Okay, and any other big themes these days? How do you business enablement, that type of thing?
Yeah, there's business enablement. The other one is evidence-based security. So, it's, you hear
I've heard
things,
evidence-based medicine. What's
I was going to say, you hear
security?
evidence-based medicine and a few others. Evidence-based security is the notion of creating a strategic plan that is catered specifically for your business model and your business strategy, right? So, a lot of security programs will tell you we're aligning ourselves with the business mission. But then when they go and they build their strategy, they're working their way through a list of, it's almost like a checklist where they're saying, all right, what compliance regulations do we need to meet, right? And you should start with that. It's the law. You don't have a choice, right?
Oh yeah, a
So
lot of compliance.
So you start with that, and you'll think about, all right, when we're creating our strategic plan, what are the 3 things we need to do to close compliance gaps this year? And then you're typically going to move to framework alignment. And framework alignment could be anything from the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, or it could be ISO, or there's other frameworks in healthcare. There's high trust. But once you get past framework alignment, a lot of security teams are then, it's a lot of gut. And really, it's actually a lot of evidence that they're using. It's just not very well documented and not laid out in a very well articulated business case. So they get to that point and they start to ask their peers, what are you guys doing, right? And they start to look around and think, well, what are the biggest threats? And evidence-based security starts to aggregate all of the information together and say, here's what the market's telling us, right? So, the security startups are telling us and they're marketing to us that you really need to think about behavioral analytics now. That's the new hot thing, right? It's artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you don't have it, then you're blind to what's going on in your network. And
it used to be blockchain, but that's faded over the last 6 months.
It's starting to fade, exactly. So you start to hear that, and then you should consider that information and that data, but then you have to think about, okay, well, what is the internal information from our business telling us, right? If you have 40,000 employees and you understand that phishing is the top threat, right? I think something like 85 to 90% of reportable health and human services breaches started with a phishing email.
Wow.
Right? So that's real evidence that you can use. You can pair it with how large your organization is, and then maybe you couple that with data from simulated phishing campaigns to say, we don't perform very well on simulated phishing campaigns, right? That's enough evidence, in my opinion, to suggest a strategic plan to enhance your email security posture.
Got it.
Right? And I think you're drawing the same conclusions that a lot of frameworks and marketing and a lot of gut is telling you as well. It's the business case, though. And I think typically and traditionally, security teams have been able to I don't want to say they're purposefully selling through fear, but nobody wants to be the board or the CEO that says, no, don't spend money there. Don't secure that in light of everything that we're seeing in the news. And instead, that's going to start to slow down. You're going to start to be challenged, like other business lines are being challenged, to say, justify your business case, right? Why do we need to keep investing in security past this point? I think that evidence-based security is going to be the next step in getting
so
that done.
you mentioned startups. Let's jump into the startup side. Just a question for you. So there's a lot of, we do customer sprints with you, which we appreciate the time to do that. And we talk to a lot of people that say, you can't imagine how many startups reach out to me. Let's just start there. I'm just curious. On a daily, weekly, monthly basis, how many calls, requests, emails, people reaching out like, oh, we have the next big thing?
So I would say on a daily basis, 50 to 75 a day.
50 to 75 startups reach out to you a day.
Per day.
Per day, every day.
I think 50 of them are successfully filtered through our mail filter.
Okay. That's a separate spam filter.
That's a separate spam filter, and it's something we call gray mail.
Right.
And
Okay.
it's not phishing, but it's called gray mail, and it's typically marketing and those types of events. And about 25 of them probably get through.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah, and I receive emails from about 25. But then every day as I go through my quarantine to see, well, what was filtered that I might want to look at,
right.
I typically identify about 50 more startups that are
better than me. I mean, we use for Google, or for Dreamit, we use Google and Gmail as our backend. I don't even look at our quarantine anymore. I just can't keep up with it.
It's hard.
So you're better than me. I know. I can't do that. But so so let's say 25 a day get through to you. Wow, that's a lot. How do you choose who to engage with? Like, what do you reply to? Because I know there's a lot of people. There's good friends, the chief innovation officer, head of innovation at Intermountain Healthcare. He's like, I've given up. I get hundreds a week, and I feel bad. That I just, So because I just don't even reply anymore because I can't keep up. How do you choose? What catches your eye?
Yeah, it's tough to figure out how. Some of it's timing, right? And I've noticed some very interesting tactics, and some people have started to use very creative subject lines, and hey, I'll make a bet with you, and if I win the bet, then you do a 30-minute call with me, and I think a lot of them, it's clever. I think a lot of them just don't realize that that's not typically the way that you do business, right? I'm not going to accept your gifts to talk on the phone with you, but it's clever, and I'm sure it works in some cases. They wouldn't be doing it if it didn't. But typically it's timing, right? So sometimes, if you keep sending emails enough, and let's say you're sending an email, we'll stay on the same topic about email security or mail security.
Right.
If I'm walking out of a meeting with my team and we're talking about that topic, and later that day, somebody sends me something, a startup sends me something to say we've found this new way to to enable your business or to block an email.
Timing's everything.
Timing's everything, right? And sometimes it will catch my attention more than others would have. Now, I will admit that as a young CISO, there was a time 3 years ago when I was paying a lot more attention to the startup emails.
Right.
A lot more attention than I do today. I mean, 95 to 98% of them today, I don't want to ignore them. I just don't have the time to give them, so I just simply ignore them anyway. But there was a time when I was paying a lot more attention to them, and I was starting to reply to them and get back to them and set up meetings and introductions with them.
Right.
And I would actually say, and this might not be the case today, but it was then, that we were in such a foundational place that I started to have concern over losing the trust of my team by bringing in so many startups.
Got it.
They had a good understanding, as did I. That
your team.
My team.
Yeah.
That we needed to continue to implement a lot of foundational security controls and program infrastructure. Right. And I think that we all started to question ourselves about why are we looking at the next gen technology when we still need to resolve very basic things.
Got it. Like the house, is the foundation solid before we go on top of it. Okay, we'll keep going. If you're just joining us today, thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is Dan Costantino, CISO, Chief Information Security Officer of Penn Medicine from Philadelphia, and we're in Philadelphia today. And if you're just joining us, in the comment section, if you don't mind, and put in where you're tuning in from, what city you're streaming in from, and then if you have questions as we go through this, just please leave your questions in the comment section, and we'll take them at the end. Let's keep going. So startups reaching out to you, then we're going to get into proof of concept trials, sales tactics they try on you. Is it? I'm just curious. Is 95% of that reach out? Is it email? Is it LinkedIn requests? Do they tweet at you? Are they cold calling you? Like, how's it break down?
So I shouldn't say this because after the fact that it's going to happen, but I haven't really been discovered on Twitter yet by a lot of startups. But typically it's email and it's LinkedIn. And a lot of times I'll get a LinkedIn, and that's become pretty clever as well. People no longer call themselves sales representatives on LinkedIn. They call themselves creative, business relationships advisor or something like that, right? And I say I could use one of those, and I'll connect with one of them, and then almost immediately I get the sales email on LinkedIn, right? And then sometimes I'll go as far as to say, I didn't like that, and I'll disconnect with them. Right.
Really? Okay.
I'll reach back out and I'll disconnect with them just because I don't want the constant follow-up in the messaging in my inbox. But that's probably 25% of it. 75% of it is email and phone calls. A lot of it is still phone calls.
All right, interesting.
And phone calls to the point where I rarely use my desk phone anymore. Right. Because it's difficult to know who's calling me at this point.
Interesting. Okay, so Startup catches your interest, somehow gets a meeting with you, comes in, meets with you and your team. It's something maybe foundational or just above foundation. You find it interesting. So you decide that you're going to do a trial or a proof of concept. And I'd love to get into some of the expectations. So, they're in the door and you say, okay, this solves a big issue for us. It's interesting, like what you're doing. Let's talk about what are the must-haves for a cybersecurity company to get a proof of concept or a trial with you. If they're not doing these three things, it's like, no.
Yeah. One of the must-haves is simplicity. One of the things that we've found is that a lot of proof of concepts and trials tend to carry a high level of complexity with them.
Complexity in what way?
In some ways, it's a technical complexity. Other times, it could be complexity in terms of business process.
But wait, technical complexity. This is IT, right?
Yeah.
It's not, and this is in an academic medical. Where's the complexity that's beyond the normal complexity? Like, what
Sure. Yes. So if you think about behavioral analytics again. And there's a ton of great startups that are doing behavioral analytics, but the only way to do that really well is to have a great level of visibility into a lot of source data. Right. So how do you get
log files, that type of thing?
Like log files, network traffic, right? I mean, it could be a number of different things, but how do you get that type of data, right? Well, the first thing is you need to tap into the networking team, right? And you need them to tap into their network and put you on some type of network tap, right? So that you can have full visibility to network traffic. Then you need to start working with the systems teams to say, hey, send us all of your email logs. And you're working with the security engineers to say, send us your firewall logs. And suddenly what was presented early on as, you just turn this thing on and it opens your eyes to the whole world, right? It opens your eyes. It's auto magic. You've never seen your environment and insider threat like this before, right? And that's what you're told. And you just plug it in and you're up and running in 15 minutes. And suddenly at a place as large and complex as Penn Medicine, you realize this is a 3 to 6 month thing, right?
Just to like integrate it to feed
just to get it set up as a pilot, right? It could be 3 to 6 months to get this thing set up because you're working through change control. You're working through networking teams that are busy. They didn't anticipate doing end user behavioral analytics this year, right? They're busy upgrading switches and routers and so that's what I mean by simplicity. Some of these things, the nature of what they do, it's difficult to simplify.
Sure, I was going to say, like, some of them, they're complex, right?
Some of them are highly complex.
But is partially just setting expectations?
That's what I think it is. It's setting expectations.
Your expectations.
Our expectations, right? I think, if we're going into it, there's expectations on both sides, right? I think if the startup sets the expectations for us, we're going into it understanding this is going to be a heavy lift for a proof of concept, but it's probably worth it, right? The end result could be worth it, even if it's just exploratory. On the other side of that, I think the business needs to set expectations for the startups, right? And say, this isn't going to be, a 3-day thing for us, right? We're not that agile. We need to, we move like an aircraft carrier 1 degree at a time, and we have a strong change control process, and it takes a lot of time to get what would be defined in small businesses simple things done, right? It takes some time to get that done in a large place like Penn. So I do think expectations are key. I also think that expectations are key on the startup side of what's the output going to be, or what's the outcome going to be.
Of the proof of concept or the trial.
Exactly. So it's expected for a startup to present to you what the gold standard of their product, could be. So, working back to the example we're using with behavioral analytics, it would be expected for them to say, you can catch insider threat by using this tool. Right? But they should be setting the expectation going in. It's unlikely you're going to catch somebody in the act in these next 3 months. Right? So instead, let's create a scenario where you're actually poking at the tool, right? Or creating, a simulated insider threat to see if the tool works.
Right, to prove, like, what's your success criteria and how do you prove it?
Exactly, to prove it out. Or simply just to let us know, hey, look, we're going to find some anomalous behavior and we're going to detect some things, but unless the perfect storm happens here and all the stars align, we're probably not going to find the smoking gun. Right? And if those expectations aren't set, I think that what could have otherwise been a successful sale and partnership will end in the result of a POC that's come to a conclusion and a customer that's saying, this tool didn't do what you said it was going to do.
And it's tough. So first, later I want to talk, you said sales and partnership. It's interesting you use the two terms together. But the other thing I just wanted to say that was interesting is, in the security business, as you well know, everything's great if nothing happens. And everybody's like, is it adding any value? So you can look at a lot of these tools, it's like, well, we didn't find any insider threats.
That's a good thing.
It's a good thing. And then, how do you run that simulation? It's almost like you're fake phishing attacks on yourself to make sure the defenses are up. So it's interesting. So we asked, what are some must-haves for a cybersecurity company startup to get a POC or trial? Simplicity. Any one or other two big things that you could think of to get that trial, that are must-haves?
Yeah.
Like you have a SIEM, you have all these things they have to integrate with. What if they don't?
Yeah, I think simplicity was one. Expectations was another, which I think falls into simplicity as well. I think the other thing is partnerships, right? So I think that and I keep going back to that partner term, but I think that you need to feel like a startup is in it to be your partner when it comes to a proof of concept. I think that you need to feel like they're going to accept the burden, on them. They understand that as a large organization and as a big team, you have a lot going on, right? You have a lot of opportunities that with people coming at you with different technologies. You're implementing anywhere from 5 to 10 different technologies or projects at any given time, and it's highly unlikely that you're going to reprioritize your team's actions to cater to a proof of concept, right? So I talked about simplicity, but I also think the partnership needs to be really strong. I think they need to come in and show you how they can really accept the burden of the implementation and accept the burden of making it a successful proof of concept.
So that's interesting, accept the burden. So on that note, do you have an expectation of what you'd expect the startup to do on the POC and the trial? They're like, hey, Dan, you and your team, can you go do these integrations? No, you're doing the integrations, not us. Things like that. What do you expect them to do? And they're almost going to be like, well, we have to bill you for those services. We'll get into payment later, but I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, so some of it is that. Some of it's the integration, but some of it is the output. So if we're implementing a tool and the output is something that our monitoring team would see, do I really want to put the burden on my security operations center to say, hey, here's a new tool that we may or may not use. We just want to see if it's good or not. Go ahead and monitor this for the next 10 days. Well, one, I think I'm adding a burden to their time.
To your SOC team.
But I also think, to my SOC team, and I also think that that's doing a disservice to the startup. Do we know how to monitor that tool correctly? We don't even know what the tool does yet. We don't know how it functions. We don't know if we're looking at it in the context that it's supposed to be looked at yet.
Interesting.
And I think that it should be on the startup to accept some of that burden and say, you provide some of the implementation services for us. And I know we're very narrowly focused on a monitoring technology in this discussion, but I think they should be accepting the burden to say, we'll take the output, whether it's an assessment or just information or monitoring technologies or whatever it may be. They should be taking that output and presenting back to you, I think, some curated results to show the success or failure of a POC.
Interesting. Okay. That's helpful. So we talked about a bunch. You almost expect, again, we're going to get more into the sales cycle, but I think POCs and trials, there's so many startups at early stage, it's part of their sales cycle, and it's really important. Do you almost expect to see a level of a project plan with roles and responsibilities? You're going to do this, we're going to do that. And do you see that today? Does a startup come at you that way?
We don't see it enough.
Right.
No, I don't think we see it enough. There's the scope, the expectations, and the roles and responsibilities.
Right.
Those are the three things that I don't think we see enough of. I think that a lot of times startups will come in today, and I think there's an expectation that we know the scope, right? I think there's an expectation that we know what our scope looks like, and we know what success will look like at the end of this POC. And a lot of times we don't. When we're working with a startup, it's usually because you're doing something interesting and unique enough that we either haven't seen it before or you're solving a problem that we have that nobody else could, right? So it's highly unlikely that we're going to understand the full scope of what success looks like. And I think if that's not put into place and well articulated in the beginning, things can go off the rails pretty quickly. And that's where roles and responsibilities start to fall in as well. Whose role is it to be the subject matter expert? Whose role is it to be the PM here? Whose role is it to provide the leadership and oversight of this thing? And a lot of times you just don't see that. They're so happy to be there and implementing their technologies,
Right.
that they'll work with anyone
Right.
who's willing to turn on the switches and get things up and running.
You know, we talked about earlier, just on that same thing, where do you see typically cyber startups underestimating and mismanaging the complexity of all of this? Are there one or two, and maybe you've already hit upon them,
Yeah.
but really like they bungle the whole thing. It's almost like they snap defeat from the jaws of victory. It's like,
Yeah.
duh, you had it.
Yeah, I've seen it pretty recently even where, a startup will say it's too expensive or burdensome or overwhelming to implement the full scope of technology that we offer.
Right.
So we've decided to limit our POC to a very narrow scope of technology. And I've seen that done, and I understand why it's being done.
Right.
It's very expensive for them to do these POCs, but a lot of times I'll see it happen right in front of me where they're implementing a limited scope of technology, and I just say, this isn't working, and it may have worked if they had just done the full POC.
So do you talk about, let's just build on that, success criteria when you're doing this? Like, this is successful if, and is it super clear to both you and them?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to hit on earlier
Yeah.
when I had mentioned, defining what success looks like. And,
Right.
and sometimes we'll define, this is where a common disconnect happens, is that internally we'll define what success looks like from this POC, and we're way off base, right?
Interesting.
We
Right.
just don't know what success looks like with the technology sometimes.
Right.
We think we know,
Right.
And we have a long list of security experts at Penn Medicine that know to an extent what it looks like, but we don't know as well oftentimes as the vendor would know or as the startup would know. And I think that startups should be more assertive to say, no, this is what success looks like, right? They should be coming in and setting those expectations early on to show us what a successful proof of concept
So it's
would
agreed
look
upon.
like.
Okay, and it's like we were saying earlier.
And I
it's
think it needs to be agreed
expectations.
upon. Exactly.
So if you're just joining us, and we see a lot of questions coming in, which is great. Steve Barsh from Dreamit Ventures, Dan Costantino are our guest today. Thanks for joining us, CISO of Penn Medicine. If you're just coming in and you've joined us recently, we love if you can let us know what city you're streaming in from. If you have questions, please put them in the comment. If you're a startup, watch this next question. This will be fun. You're Marine, so don't worry, it won't be too tough because I didn't serve. But anyway, here's a question for you. We're going through the trial process, POC, sales. Are you willing, if a startup, are you willing to talk about pricing before the trial even begins?
Yeah.
There's a couple little bit delicate questions, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you're not talking for all CISOs. But.
Understood. I'm glad you asked that question. I almost went there when we were talking about a different question.
Yeah.
I just mentioned some POCs that are limited in scope because of the cost, right? And in those scenarios, I almost wish that they had come to us and said, we're going to do ourselves a disservice, and you're not going to see the full benefit of this technology.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I ask the right question. I meant pricing of the full implementation of the product, not pricing for a trial or POC.
I see. Okay.
Which is a whole separate question. We can do either one. Like, let's do the one that you're on. I'm sorry. Well, are you willing? Do you pay? Like, if somebody says we're going to do a trial, oh, by the way, it's $100,000. You're like, whoa.
Yeah, I don't know that. I think if it's reasonable, we would be willing to do a paid proof of concept.
Any boundaries? Like, and you don't have to get into if you don't want to, but like, what's reasonable or unreasonable?
I think if somebody were to say, I think if it's an intriguing technology that serves a very large purpose in our program, then if somebody were to say, hey, look, for $10,000, $15,000, we could do a full-blown POC and have it here for 3+ months. I think that's reasonable. I think.
But if they're like it's $100,000, you're like,
it's $100,000. Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. So you're willing to talk about that type of pricing, to do a POC. What about and it's interesting because we've talked to a lot of startups about this, where we've said to some of the Dreamit startups, look, before you do a POC or a trial, make sure that end customer, what are the success criteria? And oh, by the way, if we're successful, it goes to you're going to use the product if it's successful.
Right.
And does that customer have an expectation of what the pricing would look like? And the question is, this is a sales process. You don't want to be premature and shoot yourself in the foot in the sales process, you're bringing up pricing right away.
Right.
But if you hear, oh, it's great technology, it's just $5 million a year, you're like, well, then we don't need to go on a POC because you're out of the. So are you willing to talk about the pricing of the actual product before the trial starts?
I'm absolutely willing to talk about pricing prior. I think I would prefer to talk about pricing before the trial starts. And to your point, I don't want to waste each other's time. Right. I mean, a lot of these trials consume a lot of my team's time, so I'd prefer not to waste their time. If it's just something that we can't afford, if it seems unreasonable, if we think that the market's going to shift and it's going to become a lot more affordable in the near future, I'd rather save everybody the time early on.
Okay, interesting. Good to know. I know we agree with that too. It's like everybody's wasting time, and it's the most valuable thing we'll have is time. I was going to ask paid or unpaid. You answered that. It's in the 5-figure range, not the 6-figure range, but interesting because we know some people like they will only do unpaid trials or POCs, so it's good to hear. I think we may have talked about this. I was going to say, what are the biggest mistakes, the top 2 or 3 mistakes working on POCs or trials? But you said, simplicity, expectations, scope, success criteria. I think we've hit upon that. Is there anything that you see in particular patterns where you're going through this, maybe you've started on the trial, and again, we're going to get more into the deeper part of the sales process, where you almost they start to lose your attention. You're like, guys, you're burning us out and you're burning us down. And any particular patterns you see there?
I've seen it. We've had experiences where during the process they've lost our attention. We've had experiences where very early on in the proof of concept we've recognized that this either isn't what we thought it was going to be, or we're just not ready for it yet. There's a lot of times where that actually happens, where we come to a quick conclusion that this technology works and it actually does do what they said it was going to do. We're just not ready for it yet, right? There are other things that we need to put in place first, right? I mean, they're
foundational things.
Foundational things, right? Exactly. Somebody might be doing behavioral analytics really well, but we haven't come to a single identity type of infrastructure yet.
Right.
So while this product works, it doesn't work for us yet. We're just not ready for it yet.
Or you can't get the full benefit of it.
We can't get the full benefit of it yet. And there's been times where I've noticed that happening very, very early on. You also asked, or do they sometimes just lose our attention? And I wouldn't say they necessarily lose our attention, but I think that they lose some of our motivation pretty early on if we don't feel like it's a good partnership.
Got it.
So if we don't feel like they're doing things like setting expectations and really walking us through it and making it a simple and painless process, then it's not uncommon for us to lose our motivation to work closely with them.
Okay, interesting. So let's again, we're going to get a little further in the cycle, so to say. How long does it take a startup dealing, again, Penn Medicine, if you're just joining us, 43,000, 45,000 people?
Over 40,000 people.
Over 40,000 people, 100,000 endpoints, multiple locations, big complexity, doing all kinds of things from operating rooms to telemedicine to all kinds of things. Just curious, a startup you meet with, you find them, they find you, however it may be. What time does it take to get to a trial or a POC? What's the fastest you've seen at Penn Medicine? What's the slowest and kind of average, if you just talk about that?
Yeah.
And what makes it speed up and slow down, maybe?
Yeah, I've seen it happen as quick as within 3 months, getting to the point of a POC. And I've seen it take as long as 3 years. And the amount of time I've been at Penn Medicine to finally get to a POC.
And any particular patterns you see in that? Why some go fast? Why? Again, it might be the foundational stuff you mentioned.
Some of it's that. Some of it is a willingness to, I think on the startup side, some of it's legal, right? Some of it's contractual.
Like what?
So you think about a non-disclosure agreement, right? Or a business associate agreement.
A BAA, because it's medical.
Exactly. Right. Depending on what type of proof of concept you're doing. And we've experienced all types of different things. We've had startups that say, give us your agreements and we'll sign them. Right. And we've had others that will start to redline half of our business associate agreement.
Any recommendations on that point?
I have some recommendations I do. My recommendation is to not compromise your business and put yourself in a bad legal situation. I'm not here to give legal advice either, but
you don't play an attorney on TV either?
I don't know.
Okay. Holiday Inn last night?
But my recommendation is if you're going to work with a large organization and you're doing your best to get in and kick off a POC, I think if they present you with a non-disclosure agreement, sign it.
Okay.
If they present you, a business associate agreement, sign it.
Right.
I just don't think that a startup is in a position. I just don't think they're in a position of leverage in that situation to go back and forth. And I've seen promising technologies or proof of concepts completely fall apart because our legal team or privacy office just said we're just not willing to.
It's not worth it. And it's interesting because we talk about it, and if there's any attorneys watching, I apologize for this comment. Kind of yes, kind of not. But I won't get my Christmas card from the American Legal ABA or American, not Bar Association. Is we've seen startups where they take a BAA, business associates agreement, they're dealing with HIPAA issues, they're dealing with all of this with a hospital system in particular, or any type of regulated industry, and they hand the agreement to their attorney. And the attorney does what they do. It's a little bit
exactly
like, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and they just go at it and start redlining. And it's, we see startups make a mistake frequently and advise them not to. You're not making legal decisions, you're making business decisions, and they will go like crazy, and then it goes back, and I'm sure the legal team at Penn Medicine is just chomping at the bit to start editing their base documents. And So I agree, we see the same thing. It's like, if you can, just bite down hard, sign it, and keep moving.
That's a great way to put it. Bite down hard and sign it, and move towards the greater mission.
Okay, so the fastest you've seen is 3 months, the longest is 3 years. Anything else that either speeds it up or slows it down besides the legal side?
I think sometimes it's timing. So it could be timing, whether or not we're in budget season or not. I think sometimes if we're starting a conversation with someone right before the summer or right before the holidays, if I were to start a conversation with a startup 3 weeks ago, right before Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it's unlikely. I'm probably, even if I'm highly interested, I'm going to say, let's have our next conversation in January, right? I mean, we're skipping ahead multiple months just to continue talking about a proof of concept. But, so I've seen great timing really speed it up. I've seen timing where we're just in the peak season, we've just wrapped up a big project. The team has some extra cycles and we're willing to just jump right in. And they're willing to sign agreements and they've really come in with a simplified process, and we'll jump right in and do a proof of concept.
Oh, that's cool.
And it works out really, really well.
One of the things that just be interesting in your response, we find sometimes startups that have really long sales cycles or long for POCs and trials, part of it is the pain point, right? So if the analogy I like to use a lot is like if you go to the dentist and the dentist says, does that tooth hurt? No. How about this one? No. How about this? And you're like, oh, that's the pain. We've seen sometimes like 3 months, I would assume sometimes it happens where you're like, holy crap, that solves a really big and urgent need. Let's go. I would assume which is like timing, like you said. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's timing. There have been times where I've walked out of strategic planning meetings with my security leadership team, and we talked about timing of emails earlier, right? And I walk out of that meeting and suddenly I get an email about the very topic that we talked about prioritizing in our strategic plan for the next year. Right. And it's just the stars have aligned for them, right?
It's almost like, hey, did somebody bug our room?
Right, exactly. And I'm not suggesting emailing me every single day, hoping that the stars finally align. But it's just the perfect timing, and we're able to jump right into it, and we're able to just get started because it was our number one priority. And suddenly, before you know it, for Penn Medicine, for a large organization, it's an extremely fast process.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. Well, in that process, let's get into the sales process itself. What are some examples maybe of poorly executed sales tactics? We talked about this a little bit off. And by the way, we've been going for about 40 minutes and we don't have a full hour for you. Poorly executed, it's long. Top maybe 3 things that you see that startups or any company contracting with you, sales tactics, mistakes.
One of them is, I think that it's important as you start the sales process to remain a partner and not a salesperson. All right. So it's very easy to become extremely salesy. Once you start to taste the sale a little bit, you can almost sense it from them, right? Where suddenly it feels like, it's almost like buying a car from your salesman, and then all of a sudden when they hand you the keys, their attitude changes towards you, right? And you feel like, that was interesting. You were a lot nicer to me 10 minutes ago. And I'm not saying that startups are necessarily doing that, but they start to become very impatient and very pushy. And there are times, we talked about timing again, right? So there are times at Penn Medicine where we could be all in. You could have come in, done a POC, and completely nailed it. But we didn't budget for it this year. Right. So depending on timing, we may have just gotten past budgeting season, and we could be 12, 18 months away from having the funding to actually bring on your product. 18 months is a lifetime in the cybersecurity industry. And we've noticed that a lot of times we'll tell them, hey, we're going to proceed, we'd like to proceed, but we're probably 6 months out. And that could be right now. And then suddenly I'll get an email on December 16th and say, hey, Dan, I know it's 6 months, but if we close before December 31st, I can offer you 45% off or 30% off. And I said, first of all, clearly you're not listening. I don't feel like you're a partner anymore. I feel like you're simply just trying to close a sale. but also it's completely unrealistic.
Right, because you don't have a budget.
We don't. Not only do we not have a budget, but being Penn Medicine, even if I tried to move heaven and earth, I'm not closing a deal in 15 days. Right. It's just not possible.
Right.
So it just seems poorly timed, poorly executed, and it just seems like bad form all around. And I've seen that. I've seen that too often, I think.
Okay. And is there anything, do you see, like, that's other big mistakes that startups make? So part of it is, you talk about budget cycles, and they're acting like a sales organization, not a partner. Other big mistakes, or people they go around, or I'm just trying to think of some things we see.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on one a little bit right there. You know, going around people.
Right.
I think that I've seen that too often, where they would like to move faster than you're moving, and at times I've told people, hey, look, Penn Medicine can move slowly through this process, right? I mean, they're very diligent in their approach, and this could take 3 to 6 months, and before you know it, I'm getting an email from the CIO and
really?
saying, hey, this person reached out to me and they're trying to see if we can push the sale forward a little bit faster.
Right.
I don't know why they reached out, but I'm going to send it back to you.
Right.
And at that point, it's like, how
there goes the partner.
Right, there goes the partnership, exactly. And
Right.
I've seen that. I've seen that too many times.
Okay, interesting. I was going to ask, what are 3 things that a cyber startup could do to win more business? I don't know. Have we talked about all that? I'm trying to think. Is there anything that you'd add?
I think we've talked about most of it.
Yep.
I would say one thing that might not be popular is I talked about building relationships, right? And one of the things, we talked about cold emails and cold calling earlier. I'm a lot more likely to entertain a conversation or bring a startup in if it's coming through a trusted advisor, right? So you mentioned that we partner and work through Dreamit, but it's also simply just through a trusted advisor. If one of my peers that I trust says, you should talk to these guys, or if I ask them and they say, yeah, they're worth talking to, I'm 500% more likely to bring you in and have a conversation with you. So I think building those second degrees of connections is important.
Right.
I also think becoming a trusted advisor. I have a few organizations or startups that I've done business with or built relationships with over multiple years, and sometimes they're pretty confident that I'm never going to buy anything from them. Right? But they've built good relationships with me. We grab lunch from time to time. We share ideas. We bounce things off of each other. And they know that they've invested enough time in me that if one of my peers asks me about them and says, hey, we're doing a POC with these guys, what do you think of them? I might say, listen, we don't use them, but they're great. Right? They're great people. They have a strong, strong ethic, and they're good advisors, and they're willing to really jump in and be a partner with you. And I've had a few that they've never closed a sale with me, but it's certainly been a benefit to them to just be a good trusted advisor.
Do you mentioned it, these other CISOs that you talk to or equals that you're dealing with. Is there chatter in the CISO community about startups dropping the ball, and do you guys talk amongst yourselves, or guys and men and women? Right? I think the CISO at Comcast across the street, right? So, but do you talk amongst yourselves?
We talk amongst ourselves. There's more chatter now. I think it's, the butt of most jokes is the sales tactics, right? So the sales tactics on LinkedIn, or the silly emails that I talked about earlier, where people are trying to make bets with you, and I see a lot of my peers talking back and forth, and we have information sharing communities, just talking about why are these tactics being used, right? And why do they think these are going to work, and why do they think that we have the time to entertain these types of tactics? And it's not that they think they're too important for these things. They would rather have a recommendation from a peer or from a trusted advisor than to continue to be spammed with a lot of these emails. Okay. Other times I see, and this is important, I think, for startups and organizations and sales organizations to understand, is that we've engaged at times in POCs or in conversations with organizations, and other sales representatives continue to reach out to us, right? So it's clearly their back-end systems, they're not logging the right amount of information to say there's already somebody assigned to this one, but we've been close to final on a sale before, and I still have people from that organization reaching out trying to make introductions to me about their technology. And it just seems unorganized. And I think to myself, if your sales process is that unorganized, I'm not quite sure about your technology and your R&D and everything else from that point on.
Okay, I have one last question, and then
Sure.
if you've joined us late, Dan Costantino from Penn Medicine, CISO, Steve Barsh from Dreamit Ventures in Philly. If you have questions, just put them in the comment section. We're going to open up for questions in about 2 minutes here. And we appreciate you joining us, and always let us know where you're streaming in from. So one last question, and that is just a little bit, you talked about it before, top suggestions for startups to best navigate the procurement process. Okay, we've agreed, it's a great solution, you guys want to move forward. Anything in particular about procurement that we haven't talked about, that process? Maybe one or two things that you see either startups do extremely well, I always love the edges, right? Or like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, so well, we talked about one of them, which is getting through the agreements, right? I mean, I think
the startup's handing you an agreement for their SaaS software or their hardware, right?
Usually. Yeah, usually they're sending us something for their licensing, some type of licensing agreement.
Yeah.
And then we're sending them our master services agreement, we're sending them our NDA, we're sending them our BAA, and that takes a while to get through that process. There's also, and this is specific to Penn Medicine, but maybe other organizations share this. We have a list of approved vendors, right? And in order to become an approved vendor, you have to get through those agreements first, right? And you also have to be vetted by our legal team and our IT operations team, and they go through that process. Well, it takes a while. It takes a long time to get through that process, and we found that obviously the more responsive you can be as a startup, the faster it is to be onboarded as an approved vendor.
Right.
There are other times where if you can work through resellers, great. Right? I think if you can work through resellers, it's always an advantage because a lot of large organizations are already doing business with resellers and already have them on their approved vendor list. They already have the agreements in place that they need, and it tends to really speed up the procurement
so the reseller
process.
speeds it up.
The reseller speeds it up. Exactly.
Okay. Good to know. Let's open it up for some questions, if you don't mind. We're going to take them. Let me take the first question here. I might know the answer to this, but let me read it out to you. So is it best to have, first question is it best to have our salesperson there, the technical person, or both? I guess this is in some of the initial meetings. Yeah. So again, best to have our salesperson there, technical, both? What's your preference?
I think it's best to have both.
Yeah.
But I think that we talked about roles and responsibilities earlier. I think the roles and responsibilities there are key. I think it's good to bring your salesperson there, open up the conversation, set the stage.
Right.
Just basically for how we got here, right? And then I think it's important to take a back seat as a salesperson and let the technical or let the subject matter expert lead the conversation from there. Right. I tend to see a lot of my teammates and peers of mine, as you're working through the introduction or working through a demo.
Right.
Every time the salesperson speaks up, it's not that they don't know what they're talking about, but there's that perception in the industry, and you start to feel like I'm being sold again, right? I just want to know about the technology, and the time is very limited. If you're coming in and doing a quick demo, first of all, security teams don't have 90 plus minutes to do a demo. Right. So while we understand and appreciate that your life's work has gone into this, and you could talk about it for hours upon hours, we don't have 90 minutes to see it. So when you get in the room, I would say, skip the awards, right? We don't need to see the awards that you've won.
That's great.
I'd say, skip the background. If you're selling an email security product, you don't need to show us the threat of phishing. Right. We know that. We know there's the threat there, right? That's what we do for a living. And we're not perfect, but we understand it. We read about it and live it every single day.
So they can skip the, do you have any idea how big the problem is? Yes. Next.
Exactly. Right. You could skip all of that, I think, and get right to the point of what problem of ours are you solving that others aren't, or that we can ourselves?
Interesting.
And I think typically the subject matter experts in the room are able to do that.
And if they're able in the room with you, or maybe they're doing something over Zoom video, will you get technical right from the beginning? Like, do you think that salesperson should have the technologist in there? Because, let's go.
Yeah, I think that more often than not, a team is willing to get technical right off the bat.
Okay.
I mean,
awesome.
I think it starts to like I said, it accelerates the conversation a little bit, and it avoids the back and forth chatter that you've had a million times before, right? Tell us about your team. Tell us about your top threats. Tell us about what keeps you up at night. We don't want to keep having that conversation over and over again. You've clearly or hopefully identified a problem that we haven't solved yet. We want to know about it as fast as we possibly can. Get us the information quickly. In an age of very fast information, right? We feel like the sales process should offer the same thing.
Got it. Okay, let's move to the next one. Hold on one second. So the next question is, do you do non-integrated pilots where you can still prove value? So I think what that question again, so do you do non-integrated pilots where you still prove value? So you were talking about single sign-on or whatever. Would you do something where, okay, we're not going to integrate with every single log. We'll do partial integration because they're just trying to prove the value.
Yeah.
Do you do those?
We have done that in the past, right? So I think I'm assuming here, but I think part of the question is also, could they set up their technology in a test environment?
Right, in the test environment, sandbox.
Right, you could go in and play with the technology and maybe create a couple of scenarios for yourself, but it's not actually in your production environment. We do that.
All right.
I think we prefer to do it in our production environment because it really shows its value in with our information and networking, but we've done it in test environments as well where necessary.
All right, cool. Next question. We have a bunch more streaming. Are you okay for time? Another 10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. And again, thank you for everybody for joining us today about CISOs to cyber startups, right? Stop making these four sales mistakes. Okay, let's see if this is a sales mistake. Next question we have is, how do you feel if someone asks you about your budget? Yeah. Are you budgeted? You know, you brought it up, right? You said, hey, I told you it's not in the budget. Like, or what's the right way to ask you that? Or what's the right timing?
I think it's fair to ask, have you budgeted for this? Yeah. Right? I think that's completely fair.
First meeting?
Not in the first meeting.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. I think once we get to the point where we've shown interest in the product, right? And we start to talk about a proof of concept, or we start to talk about the pricing of a product, right? I think it's fair to say, have you budgeted for this? Right. And I think that it's fair because we talked earlier about not wasting each other's time.
Right. Setting expectations.
Setting expectations. Right. So, and that gives us an opportunity to say, we haven't, right? But if we're interested, we will. And that lead time is about 12 months or 14 months or 9 months or whatever that we are in timing. So I do think it's fair. I would never, say I'll never throw out the first number. I can tell you that right now.
Okay.
So I'm never going to say yes, and we've budgeted $100,000 for this.
Got it. That's great.
I know some people that use that tactic because they want to throw out the lowest number possible and try to get somebody to come down to it.
Right.
That's not my style, and I think it's probably not many of my peers as well.
Fair enough. Okay, so that's budget. Next, we have a lot of questions. Let's keep going. Any special issues if we're installing a hardware solution? So I'm SaaS software, I'm monitoring, now I'm putting a device. Is there anything different from a sales process, working with you if it's hardware?
The biggest difference is that it takes longer, right? It's more complex. If we can set up a connection and start pushing data to a cloud environment, it's sure the agreement process is a little bit more difficult and our vetting might be a little bit more rigorous, but when we get to the actual POC, it just seems to work a lot more smoothly.
Got it. Software only, you mean?
So cloud software.
Cloud software. Okay.
Cloud software.
Oh, cool. Let me. Okay, so that was just around hardware. Let me, because I can see the next question. Let me jump right into that. Are sales, because it's funny you just brought that up, are sales any harder or easier if we're on-prem versus a cloud solution?
Yeah, I think they're easier if you're in a cloud solution.
Easier if it's
and I don't know that I'm speaking for all CISOs.
Worldwide.
Right, exactly. I don't know that I'm speaking for all CISOs. I mean, some CISOs are more tolerant to cloud than others, but for us, a cloud solution tends to be a lot easier to work with. It's a lot easier to set up a secure connection and start pushing information out to a cloud environment that's already configured versus trying to implement and configure it within our infrastructure, our internal infrastructure. That's the main difference there is when I talked about getting other teams involved.
Right.
When we have to set it up on-prem, it's as a large organization like Penn, security engineers aren't running down the hall and racking servers and networking them. Right. I mean, we're working with our infrastructure teams and our networking teams. And so now you've forced us to pull all of these teams in, go through a long change control process versus maybe we're just setting up a point-to-point VPN connection, right, and sending you some source information instead.
Right. Okay, good to know. All right, let's move to the next one. The next one is a LinkedIn question from Andrew Bellarod, if I pronounced that correctly. Andrew asked, I fear the largest vulnerability we will see in the near future will be in IoT hardware. How do you deal with those types of threats is kind of the question, or how do you think about them? We can't get into specifics for Penn Medicine,
sure.
But how do you think about IoT threats?
Yeah, we deal with IoT threats, and then I think a lot of people are now calling it IOMT, so medical device security.
Right.
One of the most effective ways to deal with it is to understand those devices and start to isolate them from other portions of your network.
Right.
So I think that's one way, is to try to take them and isolate them and put them in a safe portion of your network. But there's other ways as well. So if you talk about medical device security, we're looking at all the way from the procurement process on, right? So how do we stop the bleeding? And when I say stop the bleeding, I mean, how do we stop medical devices from coming into our network that didn't have the proper level of security built into them,
From the
right?
beginning. Right.
From the beginning, right? You have all of these IoT vendors and medical device vendors rushing to be first to market. And when you're trying to be first to market, building security into it isn't always top of mind.
Sometimes an
right?
afterthought. Right.
Exactly. So how do we insert ourselves into that procurement process?
Oh, interesting.
And put the right contracting language in place to make sure that...
Oh, right, because wait, they're not, I'm sorry, I'm just dawning on me.
Sure.
They're not coming through you for security. It's,
They're not.
Philips or GE is selling some new device.
That's right.
And oh, by the way,
Right.
now you're one of those teams that gets pulled in.
Correct. They're selling a device to our radiology department.
Right.
Right. And hopefully, by inserting ourselves, now we're a toll gate in that process.
Got it.
Right. To say, hey, you need to sign off on very specific cybersecurity language in the contract, and we can then start to vet them. We can start to vet the device, vet the vendor, and understand, are you going to do the proper level of vulnerability management? Are you going to patch your systems on time? Are you going to meet our security standards on time? Are we able to put you on an isolated portion of our network that can only talk to, in very specific ways? So we've had to get creative and do things like that. I think, I think that regulation, I'm only speaking for medical device, the medical device industry here. It's not highly regulated yet. Right. There's a lot of guidelines, which tend to be suggestions. Exactly.
Okay, cool. Let's go into the next question. Next question is from Vikas from Just Protect. He asks, what does a startup have to do to gain trust, in quotes? Case studies, references, referrals? Like, what are...
Referrals tend to work well.
All right. You talked about that. 500% more likely if it's from a trusted CISO.
Exactly. Yeah, I think referrals work well. One of the things that I usually feel for startups, because one of the questions we always ask is, how many other academic medical centers have you worked with or done this with? Right. And when you think at the scale of Penn Medicine,
you're top three, right, in size.
Penn Medicine is right. I mean, Penn Medicine is one of the top in the country. So if you think of Penn Medicine, there are only 15, plus to even to start doing
academic medical centers, AMCs.
Academic medical centers of the size of Penn Medicine. So to ask that question is almost a little bit unfair, right? And maybe if you're Microsoft or Google, you could have a better answer. But most startups, you see the look on their face because they think to themselves, well, of course I haven't. But I think it's good to have referrals from within the industry, right? So it may not have to be academic medicine, but if you have referrals from the medical industry or the healthcare industry rather, it does go a long way. I think it does help.
I could see it on a medical device. What if I'm doing, threat detection in email and it's phishing attacks or it's vulnerability on the network? I mean, and I've done stuff with Comcast or AmerisourceBergen or BNY Mellon.
It definitely helps. I think all referrals help. I think it helps. Everybody likes to think that their business is extremely unique and more complicated than someone else's. And healthcare is no different. So while that threat detection technology might work really well in any industry vertical, we like to be able to talk to our peers and say, how did it impact your business operations, right? And how did it maybe enable your users and physicians? And it just carries a little bit more weight, I think, when you can say that you've been in our industry vertical before.
And that's true, I guess, he was asking, Vikas was asking about case studies. And so, cool, it's a great case study. Is it in academic medicine?
Can I say one more thing? Actually, you talked about building trust. I think one of the ways to build trust, and not every technology is capable of this, but offering a way to grow into a technology for a prospect. What do you mean by that? So what I mean by that is, instead of trying to bite off the whole thing, so if you're looking to deploy an endpoint security technology, maybe offer the opportunity to find the top, risky 100 endpoints. And let us grow into it, right? Maybe we'll just deploy it on these 100, and then maybe we'll expand it to 1,000, and then 2,500, and then 20,000. So
build trust within just Penn Medicine. Start small and build from there.
Exactly, and that's what and that's what I mentioned a paid POC, right? If you will. And so I think it goes past the POC, and you start to move almost into a paid POC. But be willing to bite off just small chunks to start to build trust over time, rather than trying to close the wholesale of the entire business. And
it's interesting because we talk with our startups all the time. That's the classic land and expand. We'll start here and then expand out. And
that's right.
Classic thing. Start small. Okay, cool. That's great. Let's go to the next question from Patrick, who asks it over YouTube. Patrick Esmondi, if I pronounce that correctly. Do you have any feedback or recommendations for the new cybersecurity guidance documents from the FDA? And you're like, I don't work for the FDA.
Yeah.
But again, let me read that. So do you have any feedback or recommendations or thoughts on the new cybersecurity guidelines from the FDA?
Yeah, I think they're good guidelines. I mean, the FDA has put out pre and post market guidelines for medical device security. I think that they're good guidelines. I mentioned this earlier. The issue with the guidelines is that they're guidelines, right? And they're not requirements.
Right.
So that's one of the myths. A lot of medical device manufacturers will tell you we have pre and post market guidelines that we follow and we must follow, and they don't, right? I mean, they're suggestions. They're not requirements. So. Well, I think they're good guidelines. I think that healthcare organizations need to protect themselves as well, right? I think the healthcare organizations need to put the right levels of or the right layers of security and levels of security in place to protect themselves, and you almost have to assume that they're not following those guidelines in many ways because they've rushed to market. It's like driving. You have to assume that nobody else around you knows how to drive.
Right, correct.
In order to drive defensively, exactly.
Interesting. Okay, let me keep going. I'm going to skip a question, just know it's a question about accelerators. We'll try to come back, but it's, I think, more of a question about us than you, and I'd rather stick on CISO. So let me just go ahead to Matthias Klein from a company, Cognition. I think they're actually here in Philadelphia. What's the ROI and timing expectations for a new product? Like, are you looking for a 3 times return on investment within 12 months, or do you think of it that way in security? Because we talk about, like, if nothing's happening, everything's good.
Yeah.
You know, so.
I don't know that we're thinking about it in terms of ROI. We definitely want to know, we definitely want to do an effectiveness check after 3, 6, 12 months on a new technology.
It's almost like your evidence-based security kind
That's
of thing,
right.
right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, that's what I would consider the ROI is a lot of the evidence. I mean, if you're clearly driving down threats, driving down phishing emails, or driving down malware on devices, that evidence should become clearly evident, right? Or I mean, it should be obvious in a very short period of time. But no, we're rarely setting ROI expectations to say we want you to block X amount of something.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just the next question. I'm going to just read it, but it's kind of the same thing, and it's from Matthias as well. At Cognition, how do you measure and value soft versus hard ROI? In other words, cost avoidance from detecting and preventing incident. I think we've talked about that. Sometimes it's soft, but you're going to get into it. Okay, let's go. Just 2 more questions. Again, if anybody else has any last questions, please put them in the comment section. Let us know where you're streaming in from. From John Corky, asked it over LinkedIn. We have, this one's a little long, and we probably don't have the whole thing up on the screen, but I'll read it to you. We have 2 major university systems as well as 2 large healthcare systems that want to conduct clinical testing with us. Would you recommend a university system or private industry partnership to begin beta testing? I can read that again if you'd like me to.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, because I was like, so we have 2 major university systems as well as 2 large healthcare systems that want to conduct clinical testing with us. Would you recommend a university system or private industry partnership to begin beta testing? I have a thought or two too, if you want.
Yeah, I think that I don't think that you're going to have more issues in a university system than none.
Right.
I think it's okay to start beta testing in a university system if you can. The outputs might be a little bit different depending on which one you work with, but I don't know that I have a recommendation of one over the other. I'm not,
All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm just going to chime in. I'll give a recommendation. When we look at this, we talk to a lot of startups about go-to-market strategy and who's your target customer. And I talk a lot about phishing, not the phishing you're talking about, really phishing. And what fish are you going after? And if your primary target market is large university hospital systems, you might want to start with large university hospital systems. That could be one
good point.
Another way, though, that we talk about is sometimes going after big academic medical centers like tuna fishing. You got to go to 80 or 100 miles offshore, and good luck, and you gas up your boat for 18 months and go try to hunt a tuna, and you die trying as a startup. Sometimes it's better to go closer into shore. And the analogy for that, like to answer John's question, is it might be, look, if you think you could close the deal, get a partnership started with a private institution because it's going to be faster for some reason, even though universities and academic medical centers are eventually where you want to go to, you want to eat and learn to live another day.
Yeah.
So we look at it, this is more salesy, right? But like, which thing do you think you could close more quickly? The industry's going to learn, you're going to learn, you can get those sales, and then keep going from there.
Yeah,
So
I think that's great advice.
It really, it depends. We have a great Dreamit dose on that, by the way, on go-to-market strategy. All right, anyway, 2 last questions, 5 more minutes, we're almost done. So this is from Alan from V2 Verify, who I think we know him, and I think they met with you. It said, as a startup, how do we overcome the lack of referrals and end users? We're trying to hire somebody with experience, but I don't have experience kind of thing. So again, Alan asks, as a startup, how do we overcome lack of referrals and end users?
The lack of referrals and end users, one of the ways I've seen some startups overcome that is...
They don't place a bet with you, right?
Yeah, they don't place a bet, no,
Right.
Exactly. Here's the thing, if you come in with an extremely compelling technology, or if you come in and you're solving an extremely large issue that we just can't solve, right? I think regardless of whether you have referrals or not, we're going to be interested.
It's the pain point, right? Again, the dentist where you're like, ow, 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 that's a really big pain point.
That's right. If you really blow us away and you show us something we just hadn't seen before or hadn't considered before, or you start to solve a problem that nobody could figure out before, there is more willingness to be the first to market in that area. So that's part of the problem. I mean, part of the problem is the reason that referrals are so nice is not only to help vet the startup, but it's also because there's a small little part of you that doesn't want to be the very first one that's ever tried this. Especially not in academic medicine. But if you have a product that's really just nailing it and solving something that really needs to be solved, I think there's a lot more willingness to dive in and be first to market.
Got it. Okay. So solve a big pain point, have a
solve a big
solution.
pain point. I know that's a tough answer because I'm saying just have a better product, right? But
But honestly, how many times do you see a startup that comes to you and you're like, we have a unique solution, and you're just thinking, maybe you don't say it out loud, yeah, it's not so unique.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's differentiation. A lot of times people are bringing us slightly better versions of what we've already seen before. And if you want us to take a leap and try a slightly better version, you need a strong referral. Right? But if you're completely innovating something, we're more willing to take a chance on you without one.
Okay, so here's the last question again from Vikas at Just Protect. We'll see if you can answer this or not, and then we'll wrap up. So what are the most pressing issues you're trying to solve right now? In other words, what are your open opportunities for partnership? I don't know if you want to get in. Is there anything you talk about at an abstract level? Because this is security, so I don't want to,
Yeah, sure. Can you repeat
so again, the question, what are the most pressing issues you're trying to solve right now? In other words, things that you're open for opportunities for partnership? Could you maybe at a high level?
Yeah, at a high level, I can talk about it. I mean, one of them is the culture, right, within a business, and we have a mantra at Penn Medicine that
security culture. Do you mean
security culture? Right. We have a mantra at Penn Medicine that information security is everyone's responsibility. And that's nice to say, and it's easy to say, right? And it's easy to put the taglines everywhere, but how do you actually get people to believe and buy into it? So shifting the culture is something that security programs have been trying to do for years and years and years now, and that's why I talk about business enablement, right? How do we start to enable the business through security? And I think through that, we'll start to shift the culture a little bit. But, at the end of the day, one of the problems we're trying to solve is make people more vigilant, but when they make a bad decision, right? They click on the link that you didn't want them to click on, or they open the attachment you didn't want them to open. How do you protect them from themselves? Right. And we're working on, that's the kind of the layered approach that we're taking. So it really is culture, and it's also creating sandboxes and backup plans and and safe areas for people to operate within, so that we can continue to enable through security as much as we can.
Okay, great, thank you. So a couple last things, and then we're done. So. A couple things I want to hit on again. We appreciate so many people streaming in today to talk about, from a great CISO that's 3 years at Penn Medicine now, stop making these kind of big sales mistakes that we've talked about. A couple other things I just want to hit on real quick. If you're interested in Dreamit and what we do, please apply. It's easy to find us. You go to dreamit.com/apply. We focus on, obviously, secure tech and cybersecurity, health tech, which we've done a lot with Penn Medicine over the years, and also urban tech. So if you're interested, please apply to our program. A lot of the topics we touched upon, please check out our YouTube channel. We have something called the Dreamit Dose, and we have them on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and just look up Dreamit Ventures, great series called the Dreamit Dose. There's a couple more that we're going to release. We just shot them last week, and Dustin's doing the post on them, and hopefully they come together. For upcoming events, we actually have another cybersecurity or secure tech one coming up. Go to dreamit.com/events. We have a show coming up December 18th. It'll be our last one of the year. Ron Gula, who's a very prominent angel investor, is actually down in kind of the Baltimore area. We're going to talk about avoiding 5 common cyber entrepreneur pitfalls that we see. And Ron's a great guy. He's going to stream in with us. Please make sure. And if you go to dreamit.com/events, you'll see all of our upcoming events. And we wanted to thank you for your time today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was great. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in. Please follow us on all of our social channels, and thanks for watching today. Take care.